Hi, my name is Joanna Whitney. I am an intuitive artist and a student of natural law and also an energy healer. And we're studying the Kybalion right now. And we're on page 18. And the reason we're studying the Kybalion is because it is part of the immutable laws of nature. And it was studied by or brought forward by 3 initiates who claimed to have tapped into Hermetic knowledge, mainly in the Emerald Tablets. And I'll put some links in the description for the Emerald Tablets. And now, today, we're on the Law of Polarity. So I'm going to read and discuss this chapter and how it is being used upon us and how we can use the Law of Polarity. So everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. The Kybalion. So once again, the all, which is mental, exists in the ether, the etheric plane, which is non-dual. It is unity consciousness. But everything on earth is in dual consciousness. And you can see that by how each principle after the first principle is describing a dual principle. So this one is the one that describes that principle itself, the law of polarity. And it does say here that all truths are but half-truths, but this is small t truth, not the truth. There is the truth, and the truth exists in unity consciousness and is expressed here on earth through morality and moral behavior. So, although the truth that is a half-truth would be a human perception of a situation. So it goes on to talk about that, but I just wanted to say that because right now there is, because we are sort of at effect of those who understand the Kybalion and these principles, and they're using them against us. So right now here on Earth, we are being influenced into being polarized either on one side or the other of whatever the issue is by the global elite for the purpose of creating chaos. And so it's up to us individually to see through that and try to find neutrality. The antidote to the law of polarity is to find neutrality. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. I'm going to read a little bit here. It says, this principle embodies the truth that everything is dual. Everything has two poles. Everything has its pair of opposites, all of which were old Hermetic axioms. It explains the old paradoxes that have perplexed so many, which have been stated as follows. Quote, Thesis and antithesis are identical in nature, but different in degree. Opposites are the same, differing only in degree. The pairs of opposites may be reconciled. Extremes meet. Everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything, etc. It explains that in everything there are two poles, or opposite aspects, and that opposites are really only the two extremes of the same thing, with many varying degrees between them. To illustrate, heat and cold, although opposites, are really the same thing, the differences consisting merely of degrees of the same thing. Look at your thermometer and see if you can discover where heat terminates and cold begins. There is no such thing as absolute heat or absolute cold. The two terms, heat and cold, simply indicate varying degrees of the same thing, and that, quote, same thing, which manifests as heat and cold, is merely a form, variety, and rate of vibration. So heat and cold are simply the two poles of that which we call temperature. And the phenomena attendant thereupon are manifestations of the principle of polarity. So this brings to mind something that happened this week in one of the groups I belong to, in which someone threw out a baiting remark and into a group that in which it was really off topic, and that person was then banned from the group. And that person has been banned many times from the group for doing this sort of baiting commentary. So what happens when someone throws out baiting commentary is that most of the time, it creates polarity where one set of people opposes that person and then the other set defends them. And the two groups are polarized against one another. Whereas that same group of people that by going into a state of polarity would fall for the same behavior in themselves if it happened to them, because they so easily fall into a state of polarity. And that is why the solution to polarity is neutrality, which can be expressed by neither endorsing nor opposing any causes, meaning that I may have my own point of view, which is polarized against someone's behavior, but I try to keep that to myself until it's absolutely necessary for me to take sides, which it usually is not ever necessary for me to do that except privately. And that by not succumbing to the dual polarity, I maintain extreme power. And so take, for example, also like this election or whatever, and the blues versus the reds. The blues are polarized into mommy needs to take care of us, and the reds are polarized into daddy needs to take care of us mentality. And the blues are convinced that if the reds would die, everything would be fine. And the reds are convinced that if the blues would die, everything would be fine. But really, in each's polarity, each's expression of the polarity should they get their way, they would just create another set of polarity, which would be in opposition to itself. And so there is no peace, there is no neutrality when one is polarized. So I would recommend that it be the goal for each of us to recognize where we are polarized, and in our meditation practice, use that as a source point to find that neutrality between the two poles and rise into that neutrality in meditation. And then from that vantage point, you could see how useful it is for a usurper of power to try to make large groups of people polarize into one side or the other, because it creates chaos. Okay, to continue. The same principle manifests in the case of light and darkness, which are the same thing, the difference consisting of varying degrees between the two poles of the phenomena. Where does darkness leave off and light begin? What is the difference between large and small, between hard and soft, between black and white, between sharp and dull, between noise and quiet, between high and low, between positive and negative? The principle of polarity explains these paradoxes, and no other principle can supersede it. The same principle operates on the mental plane. Let us take a radical and extreme example, that of love and hate, which is what I was just talking about. Two mental states apparently totally different, and yet there are degrees of hate and degrees of love, and a middle point in which we use the terms like or dislike, which shade into each other so gradually that sometimes we are at a loss to know whether we like or dislike or neither. And all are simply degrees of the same thing, as you will see if you will but think a moment. Some of us, I could say for myself, have a rebellious streak and therefore always argue whatever is put forward. This is a bad habit because it always creates a state of polarity. And the reason to do this would be to get attention. And to always get to be angry and always get to be right. And that's another effect of polarity, is self-righteous indignation, which is a polarity in and of itself, because when one indulges in self-righteous indignation for a period of time, one feels very good, but then 3 hours later, one would feel self-loathing and not realize that it was related to the expression of self-righteous indignation, because what goes up must come down. And so if I indulge in self-righteous indignation and feel self-righteous and good about myself and how they are bad, those people or whatever, then I'm going to later feel terrible about myself, which is another reason why neutrality is so much more appealing than falling for the indignancy of self-righteous indignation. But I mean, that's going on right now in our world so hardcore. There's so many polarities being inflicted upon us through the media for this very purpose, because it creates war. This is what war comes from, is polarity. All right, let's see. I'm gonna just probably reread a sentence. And all are simply degrees of the same thing, as you will see if you will but think for a moment. And more than this, and considered of more importance by the Hermetists, it is possible to change the vibration of hate to the vibration of love in one's own mind and in the minds of others. Many of you who read these lines have had personal experience of the involuntary rapid transition from love to hate, and the reverse in your own case and that of others. And you will therefore realize the possibility of this being accomplished by the use of the will, by means of the Hermetic formulas. Quote, good and evil are but the poles of the same thing, and the Hermetist understands the art of transmuting evil into good by means of an application of the principle of polarity. In short, the art of polarization becomes a phase of mental alchemy known and practiced by the ancient and modern Hermetic masters. An understanding of the principle will enable one to change his own polarity as well as that of others, if he will devote the time and study necessary to master the art. So this can be done through self-reflection and by looking at the things that you hate about the other person and honestly evaluating your own behavior and seeing that you have acted that exact same way. When you do that, because a person, you would be neutral to another's behavior if you had never acted the way that you're angrily acting towards them. The only reason people get angry at other people is because they're acting the way they once acted at some point. So if you practice self-reflection and look at the person that you hate and see yourself in them, you will rise into a state of neutrality, rise out of polarity into neutrality, and gain compassion. And that is a state of mental alchemy. And also, it's also, you could do this using the golden rule. That would be the reason to do it, would be because to do unto others as you would have others do unto you. So in other words, do I want others to hate me? No, I do not. So therefore, I will apply the principle of polarity to myself, or the principle of neutrality to myself, by being self-reflective as to how I have behaved the way that the people I hate are behaving, so that I can find compassion for them. And once I find compassion, then I no longer am polarized into hate. So, I also was interested to see how they talked about the principle of vibration earlier, because heat and cold is part of the principle of vibration, because in the principle of vibration, Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. So if that's the case, then I don't have to stay in hate forever. Resentment is a spiritual illness, which really I'm taking poison so that I can harm the other person, but I'm the one taking the poison of resentment. And so because in the principle of vibration, everything moves and nothing rests, I could just simply decide that I'm going to take that on about anything that I hate. So for example, like with regards to the law of polarity, a good exercise would be to write down everything that you hate and everyone that you hate. Make a list and then write down how you've behaved that way in one way or the other. Like you could figure it out. I'll take an example, the example of the person that I said was kicked out earlier this week, for example, of a group. I have behaved that way when I was a child, when I was a young child, I had contempt prior to investigation about many people. I decided that groups of people were bad based on conjuring in my own mind. And so that would be a reason for me to hate someone who did that. But you see, because we are all connected, I would then be hating a part of myself. And I know that that is wrong and won't work in the time that we're in, where we have, we've discovered that we have to raise our vibration. I don't want to be projecting a low vibration and therefore attracting very low polarity to myself. So in order to raise my vibration, I would have to be honest with myself and see how I have behaved that way and rise above it and have compassion for the other person. So hopefully you guys are still doing your meditation practice, because this would be a great topic to meditate on. See you next time.